So what the caliphate accomplished in a way was to set up this huge framework in which Islam could exist. The population inside of that empire was not very much Muslim. The Arabs were Muslims, but the other people were not largely Muslims. The first people outside of Arabia to become Muslims were the North Africans, the people of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. And they became Muslims approximately in the period 710 to 720, very rapidly. A lot of European historians have expressed disbelief that a people who didn't speak Arabic could have just suddenly become Muslim like that in one fell swoop, and how you wouldn't have had any facilities even to preach to them or teach them what Islam was or anything. But it's true. They became Muslims very fast, and even if not in 10 years, then in 30. Because by 740, when the unity of the Muslims was broken by the revolt of the North African Berbers, the Berbers were clearly Muslims and didn't give up Islam. So the Berber reaction to the conquest by the Arabs was not to repudiate the religion that the Arabs had brought, but rather to take it up and to use it themselves. And that has always been the case of Islam amongst all peoples. And if you wrote a history of North Africa, you could see that the mechanism went like this, that the Arabs tried to conquer North Africa, but they could put very few forces there. And consequently, they weren't very successful. Although the settled, civilized people of the coast in Tunisia, who had been under the Roman Empire before and now came under the Muslims, those people looked to the Arabs for protection from the mountain Berbers, who were the dominant element in North Africa. But there was no cowing the Berbers or getting them to surrender. But when, because of the fewness of the Arabs in North Africa, the Caliph sent a non-Arab commander, an Iraqi, from Iraqi Christian origin, was sent to North Africa as the governor instead, he thought, well, I will invite all of these people to become Muslims on the same terms as the Arabs. They can remain in their own tribal regiments under Berber tribal names, and they will have the same obligations and rights. So the Berbers all just became Muslim like that. And then they went over together with the Arabs and conquered Spain. And after that, the later Umayyad caliphs in the period 720 to 740 tried to restore the previous situation, but they did not succeed in doing that because the Berbers revolted in 740, breaking the unity of the caliphate forever, establishing the independence of Morocco, which was the first state to separate from the Muslim unity, and all of that because they were oppressed, so they elected their own caliph. And Spain was cut off, and so it became independent as well. And that was the end of the unity, political unity of Islam. Because the Berber revolt required so much energy, the caliph threw army after army at it. And this is the book I wrote about the Caliph Hisham. He said, by God, I will get angry against them with an Arab anger, and I will send them an army whose beginning is there in North Africa where they are and whose end is where I am here. And all of his armies perished and were annihilated and destroyed, and the Berbers prevailed. And then he said, I wish that I had sent the Iraqis, who had been disarmed for decades because they were not pro-Umayyad, instead of the people of Syria, because now there were no household troops. A coup d'etat occurred against the Umayyad household in the reign of the caliph's nephew, who succeeded him after 1 year. And that was the end of the Umayyads. So the Umayyad dynasty collapsed, unmourned there, but one Umayyad prince escaped to Spain, and Spain came to be under Umayyad rule for 300 more years, while they had lost the rest of the caliphate. And the Abbasid dynasty came in place of the Umayyads. But when you had broken the legitimate succession of the caliphs by a revolt and a military coup, you could not so easily put it back. So the Abbasids made messianic claims, but when it was seen that they were descended from the prophet's uncle and not from the prophet, they were faced by desertion and revolt on all sides. And consequently, they clutched at straws. They used military force to establish their rule, and they tried to placate some of the piety-minded, the religious elements in the empire, and said, okay, we will allow your scholars to elaborate the law in spite of us, independently, but you will give us recognition and give us support and legitimation. So the scholars went on recording and elaborating the law, and the caliphate received no support from them and collapsed and disintegrated miserably, and nobody cared. And that led to the medieval Muslim synthesis directly, which was a panoply of varied states. Now let's look at the map on page 7071. The end of the 10th century, 900. Well, this is fair enough. The little orange thing you see in the middle, that's the rest of the Byzantine Empire, which was still a very powerful and substantial state, and which the distortion of the map doesn't show the true power of. Ditto for the purple Umayyad Caliphate you see off to the left in Spain, there. The green, the Fatimid Caliphate, was a Shi'i anti-caliphate against the Abbasids. So there was an opposition there. And actually, the Abbasid area was less united than this map suggests. It was divided into competing emirates that were in effect independent. The unity that had been in Islam earlier was completely lost. The medieval Muslim states that existed, of which these are early medieval ones, and which there were many other ones later, are usually marked by the name of the dynasty. So you talk about the Fatimid state, the Umayyad state, the Abbasid state. In Europe, however, you usually don't talk about the Capetian state, the Plantagenet state, and so on. Although I guess there is a little bit of similarity in that you talk about the Habsburg Empire sometimes. So that's an exception that is more similar to the Middle Eastern situation. In other words, in Europe, you talk about France, you talk about Spain and England, you have geographical terms for the states. In the Middle East, in the classical period, the period of the medieval synthesis here, that entire period, you do not talk about geographical names in terms of states. The states were very constantly changing, fluid. There were certain geographical islands, like Egypt is a kind of an island, that of course constitute a provincial unit. But Egypt might be associated now with North Africa, now frequently with Syria, part of the time with the Hijaz, or occasionally by itself. And it was constantly changing as a kaleidoscope. And the concept of national states did not emerge, and the Islamic law did not help it to emerge, because there was not legitimacy in nationalism. And nevertheless, this was the situation in which Islam was lived.